All right, good morning, everyone. It's July 12th, 2022, and this is the Law and Policy Committee meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Ms. Lincoln, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Baker?
Here.
Chair Matich?
Here. Move to item 1, public comment for items not on today's agenda. Do we have any public comment for items not on today's agenda? Hearing and seeing none, we'll proceed to item 2, approval of the May 10th, 2022 committee minutes. Commissioner Baker, any edits or comments?
No edits or comment. Move to approve.
Is there any public comment on item 2? Seeing none, Ms. Linker.
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Moving to item 3, our legislative update. With this is our senior FPPC Legislative Counsel, Ms. McConnell. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Matich and Commissioner Baker. Nice to see you both this morning. I will start with the calendar and where we are now, and then I'll move on to specific bill updates. The legislature is on summer recess and reconvenes on August 1st. During this period, staff is working with legislative staff on developing final amendment language on various bills to iron out any lingering issues. Staff is also continuing to reach out to interested parties and to seek bipartisan support on commission-sponsored bills. On to updates. 2 commission-sponsored bills, SB 921 relating to the Data Act and SB 1483 relating to the Commission's new Political Reform Education Program, were held in the Senate Appropriations Committee and will not be moving forward this year. AB 775 by Assemblymember Berman, the 2-year bill relating to automatic recurring contributions, is expected to be amended in early August after the legislature reconvenes. These amendments include language that would address some concerns that came up last year about whether the bill would interfere with organizations that collect contributions through things like membership dues. I'm working with Assemblymember Berman's staff, who have been very diligent, and I'm also conducting outreach to organizations that may be interested in supporting the bill, such as good government groups and other groups that support policies that benefit seniors and retired persons. Moving down the list, AB 1798 by Assemblymember Bryan continues to move through the legislative process, and AB 2172 by Assemblymember Cervantes. This bill relates to eliminating, or rather allowing filers to file by email instead of paper. This bill saw some minor amendments that were requested by the Secretary of State's office. The amendments provide that for a person who chooses to file by paper, that person would no longer be required to submit 2 duplicate paper copies to the SOS, and instead would only need to file 1 paper copy. According to the SOS, they simply have no need for the second paper copy. And I will pause here for any questions about Commission-sponsored bills.
Any questions for Ms. McConnell?
No, thank you. Appreciate the update.
Okay, since our last update, all of the remaining commission-related bills continue to move through the legislative process, except for AB 1819 by Assemblymember Lee, which related to limiting contributions from foreign-influenced business entities. The bill was held in the Appropriations Committee. AB 1783 by Assemblymember Levine, relating to expanding lobbying under the Act to include attempts to influence decisions to approve certain mergers or acquisitions, was amended to change its method of approval by the legislature. The bill previously was written to require voter approval, which would mean the bill would only need a majority vote by both houses. It was amended to instead require a 2/3 vote of both houses, and under the PRA no longer needs to be approved by the voters. There is a new bill amending the PRA, SB 794 by Senator Glazer. The bill was amended to delete its former contents and now would allow a committee to knowingly accept a contribution that is over the applicable limit, as long as the committee returns the excess portion within 72 hours and does not make use of the contribution prior to returning the excess. The bill would cap the amount of the excess contribution that may be initially accepted to contributions of no more than twice the applicable limit. According to the author, the purpose of the bill is to allow committees to essentially provide change for contributions that are over the limit. The bill also codifies an existing regulation that allows return of over-the-limit contributions where there is no actual knowledge that the contribution was over the limit. SB 1352 by Senator Allen also saw major substantive amendments. The bill previously would have required contributions of $2,500 or more to be reported within 5 days if the contributions were received before the 90-day pre-election period. The bill was amended to instead require candidates and committees to file a third pre-election statement no later than 70 days before the election for the period ending 75 days before the election. For background, currently, pre-election statements are filed for the periods ending 45 days before the election and 17 days before the election. So it adds one more to the front end. SB 1360 by Senator Umberg relating to advertisement disclosures was amended with relatively minor changes, including providing an example of what yellow color value is acceptable for certain advertisement disclosure text, and adding some other minor clarifications to disclosure appearance requirements. SB 1439 by Senator Glazer relating to agency proceedings and the disqualification requirements was also amended. Most notably, the bill strikes the requirement added by an earlier version of the bill that would have required a party to submit a statement to the agency prior to the proceeding disclosing certain contributions to agency officers. And I'd be happy to take any questions or facilitate any discussion.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you on SB 790 Glazer bill that was. So my first question is, clarify, under existing law, under our regulations, committees have 14 days to return an excess contribution that wasn't apparent on its. Is that true?
That's right. There is no actual knowledge that the contribution was over the limit when accepted, and they are currently allowed to return it within 14 days.
All right. Essentially, under our regulation, when we talk about actual knowledge, we're talking about a facially over the limit check. So how does this proposal would change that? Because now, under this proposal, you would be able to accept an over the limit, facially over the limit contribution. Then you had 72 hours to decide what to do with that. How does that compare to federal law and how the majority of states handle facially over the limit contributions?
The FEC allows acceptance and return of contributions within 60 days. So they have quite a large time frame for return. They also allow committees to either reattribute to other committees or to return. So they have two options. They can reattribute it between committees, or they can return it, or they can assign it to another election. So if it's before the primary, they can split it up between the primary and the general to avoid going above the limit.
Beyond the actual purpose, which is to allow committees to accept these, for that essentially, what's the impetus for it? Is it the recent passage of default local contribution limits, and there's now a concern that because we have these new limits that automatically apply in all these elections, that may become a trap for the unwary if we don't provide this type of an option? Is that what the author's trying to address here?
I haven't heard that comment specifically. It may have been a contribution or a contributing factor to with this bill. The main purpose, from my understanding, is just generally to allow committees to provide change. And that was pretty much what I got from the author's office on the impetus for it.
Is there a widespread problem currently with committees getting facially over the limit contribution checks and not knowing what to do with them?
I did ask the author's office if they have any data on this, and they said they do not, because they're not allowed to accept the checks, so there is no record of them accepting checks. So I think anecdotally it happens, but we don't have data on how often and how frequently.
I do, and it's on the same bill, so thank you for previewing some of those. I won't cover them again. I do just want to first clarify and then some additional questions. The clarification is it, am I correct that it's adding a knowingly accepting a contribution over the limit and giving 72 hours to make change? So the change isn't just change not in the money you give back, but the change in the legislation is you can knowingly accept it. To your knowledge, is there anywhere else that our rules or regulations allow knowingly accepting something that would otherwise be prohibited. I don't know I'm trying to find out if there's another place where we allow that.
I know the Act has some curing provisions. I don't know if those are permitted where the violation was knowing. I would have to defer to our counsel on that.
Sure. And so I put you on the spot for a legal question there, really. And I don't know if our legal counsel has a opinion on that one, but I'm curious if at this point we might take a look at it before next week's full commission meeting where we're all together. But I'm curious if there's anywhere else where we say it's okay to knowingly, I don't want to say break a rule, but essentially break a rule and accept something over a limit or do something that otherwise wouldn't be allowed.
I'm just trying to brainstorm areas of the act, and I mean, there's rules for returning gifts, there's rules for returning honorarium, but as far as the actual ban, I don't know that anybody's just outright allowed to knowingly take something over. It's those incidents where you do, there are some return rules, so it kind of protects you. So even if you didn't knowingly do it, you always have that kind of that safe harbor of returning it. But I don't know that they explicitly say go ahead and take something that you know is incorrect or improper. I mean, I don't think anything would expressly say that.
Yeah, thank you. It's helpful to know if between now and next week's commission meeting that you happen to find that, or if the author is able to volunteer it. I don't know that I'd bug them too much for it. They usually do their very thorough research, but I would be curious in knowing if there's any parallel that we have that is a concern. I mean, there's lots of ways a campaign can unwittingly, unknowingly accept a contribution, it gets in their hands, and then quickly need to give it back. I don't know the idea of to make change. So if you're accepting a contribution that's facially over the limit, presumably it's by check because you shouldn't be accepting cash, certainly anywhere near that amount. I don't know how they would make change on the spot. I'm trying to think of the practical way in which the author may be explaining how this change will be given. That might be a follow-up question that I would like to know more about is if this is the justification potentially for allowing knowingly over-the-limit contributions. I'd love to hear more on that. And finally, another concern that either maybe they'll address or we may want to propose a way to address is, campaigns have benchmarks. When filing deadlines come along, they want to have as much cash on hand as possible. It makes them look stronger and shows the support is strong. And if there's any either provision that's currently in the bill to prevent this or other protections that, on top of allowing a knowing over-the-limit contribution to be momentarily taken, how to not game it so that it'll look like, for purposes of 11:59 on June 30th of a filing deadline moment, you have X amount of money, but 72 hours from then you can give back. You can make that change or report it differently. And assuming they've done everything above board, which I would always like to assume, an amendment or a next filing will show how money has been dispersed. I assume this would show up. But I would be concerned about the gaming for that public image of saying, I've raised X amount of money in this quarter, look at me, I'm the strongest candidate, when it might, at least for a time, give a false impression to the public. Those would be my three areas of concern/questions that I think before this goes along further, we'd want to know about, and just upfront express concerns about a bill that allows people to accept knowingly over the limit. The other part where it's, hey, you know what, I need to have some time to cure an unknowing acceptance without so many other obstacles being triggered. I think I kind of like how that sounds, but the knowing one is of concern to me. I welcome the thoughts of the chair on those points.
Well, let me just start there because we spent a lot of time framing this discussion between like a knowing acceptance and an unknowing acceptance. And I think what we're really talking about, because to me, when we talk about knowing or not knowing, there's an intent element there. And I think it doesn't need to be that complicated. It's either a facially over the limit check, and then what do you do with that if you receive one, or if this kind of gets to another question I have, which is, I'm not sure how many people are actually accepting physical checks these days and running to a bank where they have that opportunity to see it versus electronic deposits coming in where they may not have that knowledge at the time. So maybe that's part of what's animating this. I digress. So there's either the facially over the limit contribution, which is what I think we mean when we say actual knowledge. And then there's the situation in which somebody has contributed multiple events, and perhaps the last event in time causes them to potentially exceed the contribution limit, but you don't know that until you've gone back and attributed all those checks or aggregated all those checks together, which in our parlance, I think under the reg is an unknowing acceptance. But that's what we mean by it, right? It's like the contributions that come in multiple combinations or what have you, and then ultimately you end up over the limit. Under those circumstances, when I look at it that way, and I consider that we may, as a matter of logistics, be getting away from people physically handing over checks that at the time it's easy to see they're over the limit, I think it becomes a little bit more understandable why the author may be pursuing this. And I was struck by the fact that our rules seem to be far more stringent than federal law, for example, even other states that allow for some curing. I think I consider more of a curing period. So, but I'm interested. I would like to know more from the author's office about, like, specifically, is it the default contribution limit? Is it the way campaigns are accepting money that's causing this problem and it's creating a trap for the unwary? I want to have a good understanding of what's driving. Then I'd like to understand specifically under this bill, as you described, Ms. Nakano, under federal law, if I'm a campaign and somebody sends me a check that is over the contribution limit, I understand it under federal law, my campaign certainly you could return the excess amount. That's one option. The other option is you could redesignate it to the general election, assuming you haven't exceeded both contribution limits. Or if it came from a joint checking account, you could reattribute half of that amount to your spouse, right? So there are multiple options under federal law, and I think other states take a similar approach to when a committee is presented with an amount that needs the particular election. So there is part of me that this really is just bringing us in line with federal law and the other states, and I ought to be mindful. So I think when this comes to the commission next week, it'd be helpful for you to be able to kind of walk the commission through where in the spectrum of our state's laws and under federal law, where the current rule exists. Also, for my own part, for the reasons I articulate, I think getting away from this like actual knowledge versus knowledge, and really let's just talk about what we're talking about, right? It's like either it's a check that's over the limit or it's multiple checks that cause you to. Seems to me to be a clearer way, perhaps. But then I also am just curious, as I said before, what's really driving this? What caused the author to gut and amend another vehicle after the primary? Any other comments on this?
No, thank you.
Any other bills you wanted to ask Ms. Nakano about?
I did have one, and forgive me, the bill number is not in my mind, but it's the one adding this, I think you said 70 days or 75-day pre-election report. Just wanted to clarify from what I was listening to, what is this, can you say again, is it just adding a new pre-election report, or does it also change the threshold amounts, 2,500 to 5,000? Because I know there was some previous discussion on our part about that. Where is the bill landed on that point?
Yes, thank you for the question. The bill was amended to delete that portion, so it no longer touches the $2,500 5-day reporting requirements. It only now adds a third pre-election statement.
Understood. Thank you. No further questions. Thanks for the report.
Can you public and the lay people that aren't like steeped in nuances of campaign finance, well, under SB 1352, right, the new pre-election report, what is the exact period of time you would now be getting new information about that we don't currently have? How does, like, in what actual, I think,
It depends on when in the year the election is. We do have other statements that could, depending on when the election is, overlap a little bit. But basically, this adds another dependable statement right before the 45 days before the election. So it's, I'm not sure the exact number of days it would cover, but it adds to regular reporting right before the election. Makes sense.
if you could be prepared to kind of walk us through it, like I say, just from more a lay standpoint, kind of like, this is where the current cutoff is before the election. This is what this bill would do in terms of providing greater transparency this number of days before. Dr. West, eagerly grabbing the microphone.
I just make a suggestion that maybe Lindsay could do a visual with our filing schedule for the elections this year, and then have a mock-up of what it would look like with the change.
That would be fantastic. Mr. Kano.
Great idea, thank you.
I was just trying to do that in my own head, so that is very helpful.
Great. All right. Commissioner Baker, anything further from Mr. Kano?
No, thank you. Well, I'll just say thank you for continuing the efforts on 775. This is the recurring contributions legislation that I think all members of the commission have felt strongly about its need, and we've been waiting for it to come to this point, having last year been a gut and amend bill. I know we've spoken yesterday just to continue the encouragement that even though the votes may not be needed to pass the bill by a majority and get it on the governor's desk, and that the author is working on getting support, that we may want to be really doing some outreach on the other side of the aisle to do our best to have bipartisan support for the bill. And if there are any points of feedback or input from members of the minority party that are helpful to have, we'd love to have them by next week so that we might be able to provide any guidance, because once August 1st, I think it is, or whenever they come back, comes around, the fur flies very quickly, and we'd like to have everything lined up before then as much as possible. So thanks for those continuing efforts, and just an encouragement, particularly, we'd love to make sure our bills are bipartisan, even when they don't have to be.
No, it's a good reminder, and actually reminded me to ask a question. Ms. Nakano, and you may have already mentioned this, and I just heard it, but on AB 775, do we have any Republican co-authors on that bill?
Yes, I have news that we have, Assemblymember Cunningham will be the co-author.
All right. Well, in the same vein, Mr. Baker just mentioned, I think we need to reach out to all stakeholders and make sure we have everyone's feedback for the benefit of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Kano, anything further for us on your report?
Nope, nothing further to say, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week. All right, any public comment on item 3 before Ms. Nakano leaves the table? Hearing and seeing none, thank you, Ms. Nakano. Brings us to our final item, item 4, discussion items for our August meeting. I presume we will be having a conversation about legislation in August. Beyond that, Commissioner Baker, was there anything else you wish to hear in law and policy for our August meeting? Not
for August. I think we'll have plenty to talk about legislative leave for the fall when we work on that, and August is just a little bit ahead of that, so we'll wait for that. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Go ahead, and do I have a motion to adjourn then?
Move to adjourn.
I will second. Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.